Hello, I would like to do a responsorial psalm tutorial. This is going to be responsorial psalm St. Charles Borromeo style. I'm going to start with just looking at the top of this page. I have written seventh Sunday in ordinary time. That's going to tell you what's Sunday of the church year or whatever day of the church year this responsorial psalm is for. In parentheses, I have A. That means year A. So in our lectionary cycle, we have A, B, and C. These start in Advent 1 starts our new year. So we have Advent 1 starts a new lectionary year. When the next Advent rolls around, then we are in year B and year C. So there's 3 years. I mentioned this because if you, by chance, are going to be a cantor and you're looking up recordings, if you just look up at the Sunday of the church year, it may not be correct. So you really need to make sure that you know the year A, B, or C, because you might get lucky if you don't put the year in, but most of the time they're not going to match. Okay, so that's just a warning. All right, underneath that in italics, we have the Latin, and this actually does not have to do with the psalm, it has to do with the introit for the day. And this is just to identify the Mass. We identify it by the opening of the introit. For example, if I say something about Gaudete Sunday, many of you will know I am referring to the third Sunday of Advent, when we light the rose candle and have the rose vestments because of the introit. That Gaudete is the first word of the introit. Responsorial psalm, that seems pretty self-explanatory. Psalm 103. Now, this is actually not all of Psalm 103, but again, that's just for reference. If you want to look up in the Bible, there you go. Antiphon. All right. So the antiphon I have written in modern notation. And I typically write this. Sometimes we use ones that Father Ken has written or that Peter has written. And typically we have a smaller group introduce this. For example, maybe the women from the choir. And then the whole assembly repeats it. So this one sounds like this. The Lord is kind and merciful. Now, the cool thing about this tutorial is I am going to help you with the psalm tone, which is underneath that. Because this is the tricky part and the part that can scare you if you are not used to reading Gregorian notation. So, this is Psalm tone 6. There are 8 Gregorian tones. Psalm 6 is one we use a lot. It's just a very pleasant, easy one. So, it's pretty familiar. And to start, when we're looking at this, you notice that there's 4 lines. This right here, that looks like a telephone, that is the do clef. So that is indicating that the solfege syllable do is on the top line. Now, some of you will just be rolling your eyes like, why would we don't do solfege, that's just way too much. But I am teaching the children solfege because it is an excellent, perfect way to know, figure out what pitches am I supposed to be singing. If I don't have a piano or I don't know how to play a piano, you can figure this out. So we have do on the top line, so it's going to be do, ti, la, so, fa. So those who know solfege are going to know it's going to start on fa and fa, sol, la. Okay, so that's going to be helpful to anybody watching this tutorial that is learning solfege with me and will be moving up to the choir in a few years. All right, now the next thing to talk about with this psalm tone. Now, first off, again, I told you it's a Gregorian tone. So I did not create this tone, so don't blame me on that, okay? I am just copying this. I have only written the antiphon and I have pointed. We call that pointing when we fit the text to the psalm tone. Now, what you see here that you may call measures, we don't want to think of them as measures with the psalm tone, okay? Don't try to fit those in the word or with the text or anything or figure that out. That's not what they're for. Basically, what they're for is to separate the parts of this psalm tone. For example, if you see INT, that stands for intonation. That's going to be the first part of your psalm tone, and that's down here on bless. I have underlined once, and the I have underlined twice. And that's just all in that first, what you would see as a measure. I don't know what else to call it. Important to mention is this. This is a podatus. Okay? These are two separate pitches on one syllable, and that's indicated down here by the. They both get the same, they both get a pulse, and you're going to read the bottom one first and then the top. Bless the. So that's how that podatus and any of them, that's how they work. Bottom to top on one syllable. Okay. And if it was written in modern notation, it would look like this, and it would have a little slur over the top. All right, so we have the intonation. The next part, you see that this is an open white note. That is, you may see TEN. That's going to stand for tenor. I never call it the tenor in choir. You're going to hear me refer to it as the reciting tone. So after the intonation, do do do, and then you're going to probably have quite a bit of words of the psalm on this reciting tone. Okay, so when in doubt, you're often singing the reciting tone. All right. So we got the intonation and the reciting tone. The next part, which does not actually happen in this particular psalm, is the flex. And the flex I have put in parentheses, and that's just to help you know that if there's not a flex, ignore it, okay? This parentheses, you wouldn't see that in the actual Gregorian notation. I've just done that to help you out. So there are no flexes in this responsorial psalm, but if they're typically they would happen at maybe a semicolon, or if we have a first, like a really long line, it's going to kind of break that line up, and so you're going to have something like do 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 do, and then back to your reciting tone. Okay, this is called a quarter bar. And that's just sort of there telling you after the flex, there's a little pause, and then you can go back to your reciting tone. So, given that in this responsorial psalm, this particular one, we don't have any flexes, you can feel free to ignore it. Look at that. Now, one thing I failed to mention was this accent. What looks like an accent. You can pretty much ignore those two. I write them there because it's good for you to know that in the actual notation they are there, and really they're helpful when you are singing in Latin. Naturally, the accented part of the word is going to fall on those pitches. It doesn't always work out in English, so we kind of have to work with that. Sometimes if we have like we get sort of accented words or unaccented words, we have to soften up because it just happens to be that when we sing the psalm in English, it just doesn't work as intuitively as in Latin. So that's just a challenge that you have to deal with when you're singing in English, okay? So, yeah, we'll keep that crossed out. The next part is the mediant. And we're still on this first line, okay? So we have bless the. And with the podatus, I want to mention too, it is hard to see that I have two underlines here. Okay, I do it in Microsoft Word, and that can be hard to see. So I encourage you to use whatever notation you need to use to indicate to yourself that there are two pitches there. One thing that I like to do is just two dots. That tells me there's two pitches there. Some people just write a 2. I've heard people do a U kind of like that. You could even do combination, have like a smiley face or an umlaut. Whatever it takes for you to be able to see that there are two pitches on those. And then you see in my pointing that the intonation I don't put in bold just because it's the intonation. That's kind of a given. And then I have in bold Lord. This one actually goes straight from the intonation to the mediant. It's short, so we don't go to the reciting tone. But where I have underline in bold, that's where the pitches change. So this is going to be, bless the Lord, O my soul. All right. So the mediant is, bless the, and we have, Lord, O my soul. And you might be wondering, well, what about these notes? All right. Now those are there if we need them for the text. So that's one of the challenging things about the responsorial psalm is sometimes you need these notes and sometimes you don't. It's just a matter of reading the pointing and figuring it out. The dotted lines will kind of indicate like, oh, you either need to ignore it or move on. Now, if you don't need those extra notes for the syllables, you just read the filled in notes. Do, 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 do. If you need them, do, 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 do. But that's really important to have in mind where those happen, because that is just one of the things that we have to figure out in rehearsal. All right. So we've made it from the intonation to the reciting tone to the flex that we don't have to the mediant and the redundant syllables. And you see an asterisk. Woo! And here is an asterisk. That means we are ready to move on to the second part. Again, I leave the reciting tones when I write it. I keep them just a blank open note. Often you will see like this, and that just gets really tedious for me to write out. But if you see a bunch, that doesn't mean that you have to sing it 3 times. It just means sing it for however long you need to sing it. I just put an open note. In modern notation, you would see something like this, a whole note with 2 lines on both sides of it. So that's just basically keep singing on that note for all the words you need, okay? All right, so we're on the second half of the line at the asterisk, and we're going to start on the reciting tone. And all my being, bless his holy name. So you see, we did have to use this redundant syllable. And bless his holy name. And right here on the podatus, that's hard to see. That is a podatus. You can see there's 2 underlines there. So, whatever you need to write in to tell you that it's 2. Now, this part of the line after the reciting tone here is called the termination. More often, you'll probably just hear it called the ending, okay? But either way, that's the ending. And I want to give you something, a big hint that I think can be helpful that we don't always think of. The termination can often be the hardest part of the psalm, especially because the very end is just Latin. It usually works out beautiful in English. Sometimes we're stuck with these redundant syllables a lot and awkward wording at the end. But For tone 6, how I have written, this podatus that corresponds with these two pitches on one syllable, they're always going to be right after the change in pitch. So your reciting tone here, and all my being, bless, and that changes right there, his holy name. Sometimes people are wondering, well, which one gets two pitches? Well, for one, I have them double underlined, so make sure you put your notations in. But look at this. Every single one of them, it comes right after. It's the second part of that. There are no options for redundant syllables in there. So it's always going to be that second part. All his benefits. Okay? So that can be helpful to know. You don't have to worry about redundant syllables. It's always going to be that second bolded word. All right. Something I probably should have mentioned way before now. Make sure before you get going, you know where your antiphons are. You know that someone's going to introduce it, then everybody's going to sing it, and then you go into the verses. But these antiphons work out nicely. You've got the psalm tone repeats, but they don't always work out so perfectly and symmetrically, so pay attention to that, okay? Another thing I would mention on the psalm is that I have the intonation, but when we go back to repeat the psalm tone, I do not have the intonation here, okay? So that just goes back to the reciting tone right here. So I'm just going to sing through these verses and to show you how this is done. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all my being, bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. The Lord is kind and merciful. He pardons all your iniquities, heals all your ills. And I actually just realized that I messed that up a little bit. And actually, what I have written here is not good. I don't like it. I actually wrote, heals all your ills. It really ought not be like that. I think what I was thinking, we had cantors before, and this is another instance on this heals, where if I do it like I just sang it, we skip over the reciting tone, sort of like the very first line at the beginning, but it really ought to be, heals all your ills. Yeah, so that's one of those kind of discrepancies. Sometimes there are different options, there are different ways you can do it, and at the end of the day, we just have to agree on it all as a choir. But that is particularly bad, so just ignore that. All right. He redeems your life from destruction, crowns you with kindness and compassion. The Lord is kind and merciful. And we want to keep things even, be quite aware with 3-syllable words in particular, that we're not speeding up and trying to squish 3 syllables into sort of one pulse. Just keep them steady. One thing else, another thing I wanted to say on the pointing, for example, up here, bless his holy name, up on the top. Bless his holy name. That's one where you have 2 syllables on one pitch. And I find it helpful sometimes to do a bracket like that, to tell me there's going to be 2 syllables on one pitch. Okay, that's just sort of an extra. Okay, so I'm going to start at down here on merciful. Merciful and gracious is the Lord, slow to anger and abounding in kindness. Not according to our sins does he deal with us, nor does he requite us according to our crimes. The Lord is kind and merciful. And so that should give you a pretty good idea, hopefully, of how to read all of this. Trying to think if there's anything else I need to let you know. I feel like I've forgotten a lot, but this is already a lot. So at any rate, that should be a good start. I have thought of one more thing. If you're wondering, like, note values and how long to hold something, particularly at the end of a phrase, speak the line, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all my being, bless his holy name." So, for example, don't bless the Lord, O my soul. Don't hold things out awkward. It's going to follow the rhythm of speech. So not speech like you're just talking casually with a friend, but I say pretend that you are a good lector. You enunciate well. You speak slow enough to be understood, but not so slow that it's just ridiculous. So we want that sort of rhythm of speech and chant. So I hope this tutorial has helped you, and we will keep working on it. But it's a matter of, in this psalm tone at the end of the day, you cannot be counting on looking at this psalm tone, whether it is in modern notation or Gregorian. You've got to have it memorized, because you can't look at the pointing, all the underlines, all the bold, all these things, and be trying to figure out the notes. Okay, you just have to know tone 6. Do 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 do, and be aware of where the flex will be, whether it's a step or whether it's a third. Be aware of the redundant syllables, and be aware of the termination. I would like to mention that the termination here, sometimes in choir I'll have people kind of fuss at me. That's weird. We've never done it that way. I want you to be very aware that there are several terminations to all these psalm tones. Some are, of course, more popular and more sensible and maybe easier than others, but there are many different ways that it could be done, and I never just make those up. They are already written out, but just remain flexible. You have to be flexible when we're singing in English, and just be open to different tones and different terminations. It's already really cool what we do. You know, my antiphon is, there's nothing at all Gregorian about it, okay? It's just a typical antiphon, and we are fitting it with a Gregorian chant, and in English. So this is, not all churches do this, so this is unique, and yeah, so there you go. There's your very long-winded tutorial on the responsorial psalm. Thank you.